Let's get right into this explainer. On the surface, the source material presents Emma Albani as just this legendary 19th century soprano. But if we systematically analyze the data, what actually emerges is a masterclass in brand strategy, aggressive market dominance, and ultimately, a pretty brutal case study in economic collapse. We're going to test the assumptions of historical fame here, pinpoint the strategic blind spots she missed, and look at the harsh realities of her career's final ROI. So let's break it down. Here's our strategic roadmap. We're looking at 1. Strategic exile and early training. 2. Creating the Albani brand. 3. Royal networks and market dominance. 4. Pivoting to Wagner. 5. Triumphant returns. And finally, 6. Financial ruin and legacy. All right, starting with Section 1, Strategic Exile and Early Training. Okay, to build initial capital, Albani needed aggressive geographic mobility. Born Emma Junis in 1847 in Chambly, Lower Canada, she was spotted early on as a total prodigy. But our father, Joseph, identified a massive opportunity cost right away. Staying in a completely indifferent local market, that meant zero growth. So they logically packed up and relocated to Albany, New York in 1865 just to access capital. For 3 years, she hustled, acting as a soloist, an organist, a choir director, just stacking funds. By 1868, leveraging her savings and some absolutely crucial financial backing from her parish, she bypassed her stagnant home market entirely. She moved to Paris and then Milan, specifically to acquire elite world-class training. That is calculated risk-taking. Just look at this quote. She has a beautiful voice and ardor. She's of the kind of wood from which fine flutes are made. Now, Gilbert Louis Dupré, the famous French tenor she studied with in Paris, wasn't just, tossing out a nice compliment here. Honestly, this was a high-level asset appraisal. He recognized the premium human capital she possessed. But as we know in strategy, raw talent without a go-to-market plan is practically useless, which brings us to her next crucial move.
Section 2. Creating the Albany stage brand.
Having a beautiful voice simply wasn't enough to survive the highly competitive operatic industry of the 1870s. She needed a highly marketable identity. Her birth name, Emma Jeunesse, well, it was culturally authentic, sure, but in the elite European opera markets of the 19th century, it was a straight-up liability. It lacked market viability. So, acting on the advice of her elocution teacher, she executed a totally flawless rebranding. She adopted the stage name Emma Albani for her debut in Messina, Italy. Actually, scratch that. It wasn't just a nickname. It was a strategic acquisition of prestige. She was perpetuating an old Italian family name to instantly signal credibility to a tough Italian audience. It was a cold, calculated, and highly effective market entry tactic.
So what was the initial product she delivered under this shiny new brand? Bel canto. This was the absolute reigning style of the 19th century, characterized by a light tone, perfect technique, mezza voce, and the ability to trill. Albani's light voice and her incredibly rigid discipline, which she honed under her master teacher Lombardi, made her the ideal supplier of this highly demanded product. She literally optimized her natural vocal abilities to perfectly match the exact specifications of the market.
Moving on to Section 3. Royal networks and global dominance. Once the product was perfected and the brand was locked in, she scaled aggressively to establish an absolute monopoly at the very top of the market. In 1872, she became the first Canadian woman to perform at London's Royal Italian Opera. And notice the strategic alliances she forged here. A private recital for Queen Victoria in 1874, that blossomed into a lifelong friendship, culminating in her singing at the Queen's funeral in 1901. That is the ultimate high-level endorsement. Furthermore, she locked down exclusive supplier agreements. Elite composers like Gounod, Floto, and Liszt were writing or conducting pieces specifically for her. She wasn't just singing the repertoire, she controlled its creation. And this top-tier strategy? It translated into massive mass-market penetration. 20,000. That's the number of people who attended her 1877 performance of Handel's Messiah at the Crystal Palace in London. To put that into perspective, commanding a crowd of that size in an era before mass electronic broadcasting proves a truly astonishing level of market dominance and brand power. Section 4. Pivoting to Wegerian markets. Now, this is perhaps her most impressive strategic maneuver. Towards the late 19th century, the glory of bel canto was fading. A lesser strategist would have just ridden their obsolete product straight into irrelevance. But not Albani. she identified the shifting consumer tastes toward heavier, dramatic, original language operas and aggressively retooled her underlying asset. She shifted directly from Italian bel canto to German dramatic roles, transitioning from early characters like Amina and Lucia to complex Wagnerian heavyweights like Elsa and Isolde. This step-by-step process is a textbook example of product lifecycle extension. Step 1. Recognize product obsolescence. Bel canto was out. Step 2. Physically develop a fuller, robust chest voice. She literally expanded her physiological capabilities to meet new market demands. Step 3. Master a brand new language, German, to perform Wagner in the original text. And Step 4. Recapture global market share as a sought-after Wagnerian performer. This ruthless adaptability, that's exactly why she held top billing at the Royal Opera House for nearly 24 years. She absolutely refused to let her brand stagnate. Let's look at Section 5, Triumphant Returns to Canada. Her return to Canada offers a truly fascinating study in perceived value. Remember that indifferent local market that forced her into exile? Well, in 1883, after a 20-year absence, 10,000 people waited in Montreal just to greet her. By succeeding in the highly competitive European markets, she validated her brand at a premium level, which totally forced her home market to reappraise her value. The opportunity cost of staying in Montreal would have been obscurity, but the ROI of leaving, a triumphant, adoring return.
Finally, Section 6, Financial Ruin and Final Legacy.
We have to turn our analytical focus now to the stark reality of her final legacy. Let's quantify her output for a second. 43 roles, 40 operas, 4 languages, all over a 40-year career. She stood shoulder to shoulder with titans of the industry like Jenny Lind and Adelina Patti. The sheer volume of her production should have guaranteed multi-generational wealth, but our analysis has to point out a severe, fatal flaw in her risk management.
Because despite immense cash flow during her peak, her later years were defined by absolute economic devastation. Why? Well, first, macroeconomic shocks. The First World War totally disrupted global markets and wiped out wealth. Second, terrible capital allocation. Bad personal investments drained her reserves. She had built this massive cultural equity, but absolutely zero financial resilience. This forced one of the greatest sopranos of the century to survive by teaching and performing in lower-tier music halls. She ultimately had to rely on charity, including benefit concerts organized by peers like Nellie Melba in 1925.
100 pounds. That is the jarring, objective reality of her financial safety net. After a lifetime of entertaining royalty and selling out crowds of 20,000, this meager annual relief pension was all the British government voted to provide her in 1920. This brilliantly and brutally illustrates the paradox of pioneer fame. Look at the dichotomy here. On the one hand, unparalleled cultural capital. She sang for tsars, befriended queens, and was made a Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire in 1925. But on the other, absolute financial vulnerability. When she actually needed aid from the Canadian and Quebec governments, she was denied over minor citizenship technicalities, simply because she had lived in London since 1872. Widowed in 1925, she died in penury in 1930. She completely optimized everything for her art and her brand, but totally neglected the mechanisms of wealth preservation.
Which leaves us with this final, critical question to analyze. If a strategist as brilliant, adaptable, and globally dominant as Emma Albani couldn't secure her own financial future, what does that reveal about the true, unvarnished economics of historic entertainment? It shows us that without structural safety nets, copyright residuals, or rigorous financial risk management, even the most successful brand in the world is just one systemic shock away from total collapse. Take these lessons, apply them to your own strategic thinking, and never, ever confuse cultural capital with financial equity.